Well, welcome, friends. Glad you're here. I must say, thank you. I must say, there's more of you than I thought. You know, I'm just talking about walking. It's not that exciting, just you all do it, right? Welcome. Really, really glad you're here. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak a little bit about pilgrimage and my pilgrimage in particular. And I also want to welcome all of you online. I have a number of family members and friends who have told me they're tuning in online, including some people in the UK. I'm not sure if they're watching at midnight or if they're going to tune in tomorrow. Either would be fine. But yeah, I really am amazed by how many people are here. One, it makes me feel very loved, so thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not sure how many of you are here just to support me and how many are here just to go, wow, pilgrimage, what is pilgrimage? Or I've been thinking about this and want to hear more. But regardless of why you're here, I'm thankful that you're here. The desserts. Thank you, Andrew, for that vote of confidence. Sorry, online, no desserts. But yes, we have some desserts. So yeah, thank you. Tonight I am going to try to convey this pilgrimage journey that I've just been on in Scotland and Northern England. But as I've been thinking about it, reflecting on it over the last few weeks, it really has felt a little like someone saying, so you've been married to Melissa for 24 years. How was that? Tell me about that. And trying to think about 24 years and everything that happened, all of the events, the occasions, the fights, the great times, all of it. It's kind of hard, right, to encapsulate that. And as I've been thinking about this pilgrimage, I felt kind of the same, that this is a hard thing to encapsulate because there are still things that I'm wrestling with, still things I'm processing around what the Lord was doing in me and has done for me, and new memories popping up of what I experienced while on the trail. But I am going to do my best to talk about this in a way that doesn't feel like, hey, my family vacation, and we look through like 500 photos that all look the same to you. We all know what that's like. So I'm hoping not to do that tonight. But here's what I am hoping to do. I'm hoping to explain a little bit about the concept of pilgrimage. What is pilgrimage? And then why pilgrimage? Why am I excited about pilgrimage? Why did I take this time to go on a long walk? And then I'll try to explain what it was like over these 3 weeks of walking with the Lord. And then I want to explain as openly and kind of vulnerably as I can some of the things I felt like God was doing in me while on the trail and in the tent and seeing all sorts of things across my journey. And at the end, I want to give opportunity for questions. And I won't say answers, but I will say responses. And so you'll see there are 2 mics here. At the end, I'll make it really clear when you can ask questions. No calling out Andrew from during the presentation. And for anyone online, you can type questions into the chat. Jeremy's going to be watching the chat, and he'll be happy to ask those. If you know my cell number, you can text me as well if you prefer to do that or have trouble with the chat. I'll try and watch it. But we'll do questions and responses at the very end because I'm quite amazed how many people are here, honestly. But I want to do justice to your time. There seems to be an itch, and I want to make sure I scratch that itch. So if I don't do that in the presentation, whether it be really practical questions or deeper or theological questions, whatever, I'm happy to do my best there. So why pilgrimage? Why pilgrimage? For me personally, back in, I believe it was 1997, I was working on my undergraduate degree. And at what's now Ambrose University and Seminary. Let's hear a call out. Caitlin? Yeah, okay. I was there, and I had a professor named Dr. Charles Neenkirken. And I may have said this to some of you before, but I grew up in the church. I grew up in the church my whole life. And when I took his class, it was called Prayer Paths to God. I kind of felt like my church unintentionally had been lying to me for years, because I knew about the Old Testament, I knew about the New Testament, and then I really didn't know much of what happened from that time all the way up until about 1850, when the church I was a part of got going. And it was this large swath of Christianity, of people pursuing Jesus, that Dr. Charles Nienkerken opened for me, and it blew my mind. I was so excited about how the Holy Spirit had moved and what God had done and the development of people's souls over all of those years. And so that began kind of a journey for me in spiritual formation. What does it mean to be formed into the image and likeness of Christ? And really, I would say that's been my primary area of study and pursuit over the last 25 years, has trying to understand not only what can we know about God, but how can we actually get to know God like a friend and allow him to transform our life and make us more like him. And so Dr. Charles Nienkerken all those years ago began that for me. It's attributed to St. Augustine in, I believe, the 4th century, but it might not be him, but this Latin phrase, solvitur ambulando, which really means the way is solved by walking. And I have felt over the years, even from my teenage years, I began walking. We moved into a neighborhood that had a man-made lake, and it had a little loop around it, kind of like Boulevard Lake, but much grosser. You would never want to swim in it, and much smaller. And I remember going out in the evenings and doing loops and just processing my life with God, talking out loud when no one was around, watching the stars, calling out to God about what was going on in my life, difficulties, and beginning to feel like I was hearing the Lord's voice in my life. And so over the years, I have tried to walk long distances and just listen to God, pour out my heart to God. One of the greatest seasons, and I'd encourage you to consider this, was when we had a black lab. She was 100 pounds. I'd take her for an hour-long walk in the morning, then an hour-long walk on my lunch break at lunch, and then an hour-long walk at night. And those were times of just processing life and praying with God. And so that's gotten really deep into me. And there's a Celtic understanding. Some of you will know the Celtic church or the Celts. There's a Celtic understanding that the ground you walk on is holy because you walk filled with the Holy Spirit. And that was important to me on this pilgrimage as I walked, knowing that every step I took, the Lord was actually with me, going before me, behind me, beside me, and that ground was indeed holy. Walking with God is a very godly thing that we have seen for centuries and centuries. Some of you were here on, I believe it was April 7th. I could be wrong about that. But Clyde Glass spoke via video in our church about Enoch walking faithfully with God. You might remember that for hundreds of years. You might think in the Bible of Moses, long, lonely places, walking with the Lord, being shaped into his image and likeness in order to come back to Egypt and help free God's people and lead them into the wilderness. You might think of David, King David, who was both wonderful and a difficult personality, no doubt. But I think he was primarily formed in the wilderness while he was tending the sheep. And that was an important thing for him. Think about Jesus and his disciples. What did they do? They were constantly walking through lonely places, into towns, into cities, processing life together, talking, Jesus teaching them. And over the years, the idea of walking with God has grown. In the Middle Ages, it was taken, I would say, to excesses where if you were a Christian in the Middle Ages, you needed to take a pilgrimage at some point. And for a lot of people, they would die on the way. They would go, they had nothing. They had to rely upon the kindness of strangers while they walked. And often they were walking to a holy location. Often it was a cathedral or some place of Christian significance, often because there were relics there, a saint's arm bone or a piece of their skull or something, which they would come and venerate and pray, and believing that if they did this, they would be healed. And so this was taken, I would say, to excesses in the Middle Ages. And then as the Reformation got going around the year 1500, that was stopped. That was shut down. Many of those abuses, probably rightly, were shut down. You didn't need to walk 1,000 kilometers to Jerusalem to know the Lord. You could know the Lord in your own bedroom. But there has been a resurgence and a reinterest or a new interest in pilgrimage in our time. You only need to look at Netflix. There are a number of movies with popular actors talking about pilgrimage. And so this is growing again, and I think for some in a really, really healthy way. So what is pilgrimage? I think it's hard to convey exactly what pilgrimage is for the pilgrim, but I have found this definition true for me and helpful in explaining what this journey has been all about. And I know my father-in-law, George, is watching, and so Dad, I thank you for this book that you gave me just a few weeks before I left. And it was really important for me. I took one book, and this was the one book I read. And he says this about pilgrimage. Pilgrimage, in its truest sense, is religiously motivated travel for the purpose of meeting and experiencing God with hopes of being shaped and changed by that encounter. That definition sums up for me why I went on pilgrimage. I long to walk for hours with the Lord, to listen to his voice, to pour out my heart, to walk in silence, just to be with him, and, God willing, to be transformed in the experience. I also like this definition or explanation that Pope Benedict gave while on a visit to the Cathedral of Santiago in Compostela, Spain. I found this in Mark Buchanan's book, God Walk. He says, "To go on pilgrimage is not simply to visit a place to admire its treasures of nature, art, or history. To go on pilgrimage really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God, where he has revealed himself, where his grace has shone with particular splendor and produced rich fruits of conversion and holiness among those who believe." I love that. And that really is why I chose St. Aidan's Way, which is the route that I took. So let me tell you a little bit about St. Aidan's Way and why I chose it. St. Aidan's Way was developed in the 7th century. It was the route that St. Aidan took from the little island of Iona, Scotland, eastward, southeastward, toward northeastern England to Lindisfarne or Holy Island. And these pilgrimage journeys, there's hundreds of them around the world. And probably the most famous would be the Camino de Santiago. How many of you have heard of that? Yeah, it's popular. Many people go. Really, it is based in Spain, but even extends into France, and some people continue going into Portugal. I've heard of many people walking thousands of kilometers through Europe just to reach the beginning of the Compostela. So there are a lot of different trips that I could have taken. But I was particularly interested in St. Aidan's Way for a few reasons. One, much of my family history, as I've begun to investigate it, is Celtic in its origin. When you think of the Celts these days, you might think of Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. And so my grandma immigrated to Canada when she was young from Wales. And probably some of you have some Celtic background. I see Liz, I know you guys have some background in the UK as well. But I've long been interested in the Celtic church. And it's a beautiful thing. The Celtic church highlighted the desire to care for God's good creation, partly because if they didn't care well for creation, they were not going to make it. It was a harsh, harsh life for the Celts. So I began to do some research about where I might walk. And by God's grace, as I was researching, I stumbled upon a YouTube channel actually by Pete Greig. How many of you know Pete Greig? Yes, some of you. So Pete Greig, he's in the UK, he's in England, but he started prayer, what is it called? 24/7 prayer in the UK. Maybe you've heard of that. It's been going for many, many years. And if you've ever used Lectio 365, it's an app to help you pray. He also has a hand in that. And so I stumbled upon a YouTube channel by Pete Greig, who actually just a year before me, or 18 months or something, took this exact route from Iona to Holy Island in England. And so I began watching his videos and was really, really struck by what I saw. It was beautiful. It was powerful. He gave many little kind of devotionals along the way. And so I was hit and felt like I have a bit of a roadmap. Because if you Google St. Aidan's Way, I'm not sure what you're going to find. I had a hard time finding information. It's very old. Not many people know about it at this point. And it connects a number of routes that some people might know. Things like the West Highland Way in Scotland, a very popular hiking route, or St. Cuthbert's Way. So Pete had just completed this route, and I didn't know Pete, but I knew people who knew Pete. So I emailed those people and said, hey, is there any way you could get me Pete's email address? And they did. So I emailed Pete. One of his assistants got back to me within the week and said, hey, Pete is really, really busy these days. However, he'd be happy to connect you with one of his best friends who actually did this route just a year ago. And so Pete's assistant put me in touch with a guy named Mike Andrea. He's just outside of London, southwest of London. He's been a pastor. He's starting a new initiative there, which is very exciting. And he was willing to meet with me. And so over the course of about 3 months, I had a number of Zoom meetings with Pete, or with Mike, where he was incredible. So I know, Mike, you're going to be watching this, and I want to say this trip would not have happened without you. I really, really mean that. You were profoundly helpful I'm going to get emotional, but really it wouldn't have happened without you. So thank you. Thank you so much. And so he spent, a bunch of time with me, giving me the route, sending me his exact map that he used online, talking through fears that I was feeling, encouraging me, praying for me. And so it truly was a wonderful thing. He even said, if you get in trouble, I will drive up there, I will find you, and I will help you, which was encouraging to me and my wife. So thank you, honestly, Mike. It's amazing. So let me tell you just a little bit about Iona, and then we'll jump into my actual trip. But back in, 563, Columkill, or better known as St. Columba, was kicked out of Ireland. And the reason for that is a bit unclear. There are different reasons, but he was kicked out of Ireland. And so he got in what's called a coracle, which is a wooden boat, has wooden ribs in it, wrapped with leather. There's a picture of a coracle right there. His was a little bigger because he hopped in that boat with 12 of his disciples, or 12 of his friends, who wanted to start a new Christian community. And so they sailed north of England, or north of Ireland, and ended up on the tiny island of Iona. It's about 5 kilometers long in the Inner Hebrides of Scotland. And they decided, we can no longer see Ireland, this is the place for us. And so they began a community there. And you can, or I can anyway, after being to Iona, only imagine the hardship that would have been there in those days. Apparently there was some civilization in that area, but it would have been very rudimentary. And I'll tell you, and you'll see in a few moments, that is a windy, cold place. And they began with nothing. And so they began to build a church, a place of worship, places to live, places to gather. And so out of this Iona community, there was one monk named St. Aiden. And he was growing in faith. And at Iona, they had a real missionary impulse. So this was not like some other monastic movements who want to commit to a place and stay there their entire time. The Celtic missionaries always, or really felt like missionaries. We are being sent on mission to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ wherever the Spirit would lead us. So they had this idea of peregrinatio, basically going wherever the Spirit would push their boat, wherever the wind would blow their feet, that's where they would go. And so from Iona, a guy named Corman was sent out by the community, commissioned to help convert the Picts of Scotland. Well, he did a terrible job. He came back, and apparently he was harsh. He spoke poorly of these people, said that they're hard-headed, they will never turn to Christ. And the story goes that Aiden turned to him and basically said, perhaps if you were a little kinder, maybe they would. And so put up his hand and said, I'll go. And so Iona commissioned him and sent Aiden. And really, I mean, you could argue this. I'm sure some historians would argue. But Aiden and the Celtic missionary movements of the 7th century and 8th century are really why, in my opinion, the UK is a Christian nation. Rome had fallen. It was no longer. It had moved into the Dark Ages, and the Celts kept the Bible, the Scriptures, alive, and desired deeply to follow God. And so Aiden took this missionary journey, and that was the journey that I took, this journey that Aiden took in the 7th century. And so he made his way from Iona on the west coast of Scotland, across the Isle of Mull, onto the mainland, through the highlands, down through the lowlands, into the uplands, and eventually to northeastern England, to Holy Island. And Holy Island is another tiny island off the east coast of England, which is a tidal island. So twice a day, the ocean floods out, the sands become reasonably dry, and you can walk the 5 kilometers across to Lindisfarne, which is what I did, and I'll show you in a moment. That monastery, just to wrap this up, that monastery became incredibly famous and also became one of the centers of Christianity in the UK. It was made famous by St. Cuthbert, who became one of the most famous saints in England. And his body now rests in the Cathedral of Durham, just south of Newcastle, if you ever go. But this was where I wanted to go. You can probably tell, but I'm excited by Christian history. It has all sorts of ups and downs, but I see myself in all those ups and downs. And so this is what I set off to do. Let me mention one other thing before I jump into my actual trip. Back in 2005, I started my graduate studies at Regent College on the campus of UBC in Vancouver. And in that first few months, I found a book in the bookstore called Celtic Daily Prayer. And I picked it up, and I've been praying it for the last 20 years. And so it has deeply shaped me, and much of what comes out of that book is connected to these very people. So I prayed about this. I felt the Lord leading me to this trip, and it reminds me of Jeremiah 6. This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. And that is what I was looking for. And so on this screen is the route that I took. On the far left side, you'll see a little A there. That's the Isle of Iona, just off the Isle of Mull. And then I headed east, generally southeast, to the B on the very far eastern edge. It was about 480 kilometers with a little over 7,000 meters of climbing, gain and loss. And so it was a long way and a lot of up and down. And as I thought about the trip, there were a lot of fears that came flooding to me. I was afraid about a lot of things. One, could I leave my family that long? I had never, ever left for more than maybe 10 days, I think on a fundraising trip at one point. This was going to be 3.5 weeks away. I was worried about my family. Would they be okay without me? They actually thrived without me, so I don't know what that says, but I was afraid. I'm actually awaiting knee surgery, and I was afraid, will my knee hold up? I kind of actually thought that after the first day, it might just blow up and that would be the end of my trip, and that I would have to, I don't know, get on a bus or train and go ahead to where I'd planned to walk each day, but my knee was totally fine. And I'll say more about that in a moment, but I think it's because of your prayers, truly. Your prayers were holding me up. I had a lot of what if thinking. What if I get lost? What if my map gets wet or my phone no longer works? What if my GPS, I can't quite figure it out? What if I get overwhelmingly lonely? I would say I'm an introvert, but barely. I enjoy people generally, and this was going to be a solo journey. And so I had all sorts of fears. And as I was processing these fears, I was speaking with a good friend of mine who's on here, tuning in from California, Joe White. And Joe looked at me. He's known me for many, many years. I met him at Regent College. He said, Jay, I know you really well. You've been training for this trip your entire life. And it struck me that that was true. From walking to my studies in Christian history, to my love of camping and hiking, all of these kinds of things were coming together perfectly in this trip. And so that was really, really encouraging to me. So thank you, Joe. I would probably say the same. I probably couldn't have done this trip without you. Your prayers, your support, your connection with me on the trip. So that brought me to April 5th, which was the day I boarded a plane. I think we have a picture of it here. This was me at the Thunder Bay Airport. I look very clean. You'll see those clothes all the way through this journey because I tried to pack as light as I possibly could. I didn't want to carry anything more than I needed to. So I'm still processing this trip, but I feel like probably I can break it into 3 movements of what God was doing, what he was revealing to me. And so I will try to do that. And they conveniently connect with 3 different weeks of walking. So thank you, God. That works well. That's memorable. So week 1, I really felt like it was a journey of healing for me. Before I left, about a month before I left, I felt the Lord saying to me, Jay, I want to heal you on this journey. And that felt good to me. All of us get beat up in life, don't we? Whether it be through family, friends, work, just life circumstance, right? Deaths of dear people, right? Losses. We all get a little beaten up. And I really felt like that was happening to me, that has happened to me, that's become fairly clear, that there are quite a few wounds in my life, and I'll come to those in just a moment. But here's how I got to the very beginning of my journey. Pilgrimages are often hard to get to. I don't know why, but they seem like it. And so for me, it required 3 flights. It required a taxi. It required a train. It then required a ferry. It then required a very lonely bus. I think I have a picture of myself on this bus. Not very many companions. And then finally, another ferry to finally get to Iona. And, one of the things that struck me on this trip was the kindness of people. When I read the news, I don't think people are very kind. I often think, wow, humanity is terrible. But that was not my experience in Scotland. When I jumped on this bus, the bus driver's name was Andrew. He probably talked more than anyone I had ever met. And he was a lovely guy. I could barely understand him. I'm not sure where in Scotland he was from, but he had a very thick accent. But he welcomed me on the bus, and as we were driving, he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Iona." And he said, "Where are you staying?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've got my tent, and I'm hoping to camp." And he looked at me bewildered in the mirror and thought, this guy has no idea what he's doing. because Scotland had been having horrific storms. The ferries had been canceled for days coming out of Mull out of Oban over to Mull. I did get on that ferry. It was a massive ferry. I was probably 50 feet above the water line, and my window was being hit by water. The waves were wild, wilder than any boat ride I've ever been on. But when I got to Iona, Andrew and I walked down to where I was supposed to catch the ferry to Iona, just a short 10-minute ferry. And it was so wild that they had canceled the ferry. There was nothing running. So he looked at it. He kind of looked at me, he said, I've been here a long time. I've never seen it this wild. I hope it goes well. Then he got in a little van and took off. And I don't know where he went because there was very little around there, but that's what happened. And so I did have cell service at that moment. I texted Melissa just to say, I got to Finnefort, the end of the road. I can't get to Iona. Please pray for me, but I need to go and find somewhere to camp. And so I began walking. I had seen a sign for a campsite. I began walking, and the wind was so strong, I literally couldn't walk against it. So I thought, that's not going to work. I'm going to go with the wind. And so I did. And I climbed up this little ridge, and in the middle happened to be a bit of a divot, and I think I've got a picture of my tent in this spot. And so this is in between two rocks. I believe this was once a quarry, and now it's a bog. And I think the Scots love bogs because the entire country is filled with them. And so the little spot I found here was reasonably dry and without tufts of grass. And so I jumped in. I had amazing cell service for some reason. So I was texting Melissa from the tent, like, please pray for me. My tent is whipping like crazy and trying to fall over. And I think I've got a video of that night. So let's see if we can see that.
So windy.
There's Iona. So if you couldn't hear it at the end there, I said, there's Iona. So I was looking across the strait to Iona. And one thing you'll probably come to know, but when you're walking alone for 21 days, you talk to yourself a lot. So I have a lot of those videos. I've never taken so many selfies in my life, but anyway, so because of my cell reception, I was able to look at the ferry, and it said we're going to try and run a ferry at 8:30 a.m. We'll update this website at 8 a.m. So I was laying in my tent, waiting. Sure enough, 8 o'clock hits. I look at my phone. It says the ferry will leave at 8:30. So I grabbed my stuff. I jammed it in. It was soaking wet. I ran down. I had that taste. I don't know if you ever get adrenaline and your mouth dries out completely. You know that feeling? I see some nodding. You've run for some planes or something before. That's how I felt. And I got there and they said, oh, the ferry's been canceled. But in God's goodness, the little ferry terminal opened, and I walked in and met two guys, Ian and Diego. And you guys might be tuning in as well. But these were incredible guys. They were on a bike trip from Edinburgh, biking around the Isle of Mull and over to Iona. And they were so kind to me. And I was feeling fairly anxious in that moment. It was the beginning of this journey. I had a lot of fears. We had a coffee together. And then the ferry shows up. And I was able to jump on it with a few other people and make our way over to the Isle of Iona. And it was a beautiful, beautiful day. And so I walked this island. I've got a few pictures here. This is the church that St. Columba started back in the 6th century. It is absolutely beautiful. The next photo shows the cloister in the inside of it, and the next picture shows the inside of the church. It was absolutely beautiful. And it's actually become a thriving Christian community these days. It had been run into ruins and is back. And there's a worshiping community that gathers there very, very regularly to worship now. And some of you will know crosses like this. This is St. Martin's cross. The Celtic cross is famous because of the circle that extends around the center of the cross. And many people have different ideas about this. According to Iona, so take this with a grain of salt, but according to Iona, that circle came about because when they made the stone cross, the first one, St. John's cross, in I think it was the 7th century, and stood it up, the arms were too heavy and were threatening to break off. And so they created the round around it, which has now become synonymous with the Celtic Church. So this is St. Martin's Church around the year 800. But as I mentioned a moment ago, I felt like the first week of my journey was all about healing. And so I had found a prayer before I went that became my prayer, and it was this: Jesus, give me a candle of the Spirit, O God. As I go down into the deeps of my being, show me the hidden things, the creatures of my dreams, the storehouse of forgotten memories and hurts. Take me down to the spring of my life and tell me my nature and my name. Give me freedom to grow so that I might become that self, the seed of which you planted in me at my making. Out of the depths I cry to you. And so for the first week, that's really what I felt. I don't know if you've ever gone on a long walk, but these were long days, sometimes over 8 hours of walking. And so there's a lot of time to think. There's a lot of time to process. There's a lot of time to just be with the Lord. And I felt like over my time, and the Lord was very gracious about this, but as I would walk, he would bring to me a memory, some of them which I had completely forgotten or blocked out from my life. And I've had a really, really good life. But like all of you, there are hurts and wounds from our life. And so one of the things that came flooding to my mind was this deep belief that I held and have held for almost all my life, that I'm dumb, that I'm not smart enough. And as I processed this with the Lord, it became clear to me that that seed was planted in me in kindergarten and grade 1. Because I'm colorblind, and we didn't know that. And what do you do in kindergarten and grade 1? You color. And so none of my colors were right. My kids know this. They still make fun of me now. So poking the wound, right, girls? I didn't know colors, and so I really didn't do well in kindergarten and grade 1, and that began to follow me, this belief that I was dumb. Another thing that really came to me was the loss of my mom at the age of 20. If you were here on Good Friday, I talked a little bit about that. That was painful. It's painful to lose people that you deeply love and who care for you. I thought a lot about the wounds which pastors receive. I've been in ministry a long time, and there are wounds that pastors receive, just like any of you in the areas that you serve and work. But many of those things came flooding back to me. But in God's grace, as these deep wounds were being exposed, as the Lord was graciously exposing them, what I felt was his Spirit like coming over me, like water almost pouring over me, or a salve or something, and healing these wounds. I'll always carry them, but they don't feel like gaping wounds anymore. It was absolutely amazing. So there were other things as well, but those were some of them. And so as I walked across the Isle of Mull, it's about 60 kilometers across the island, and I came across this ruin. And I don't know what it was, but it obviously had no roof. It was a very wild, windy, wet place. And it was a good picture for how I was feeling in that moment. I was fresh on the trail, and the Lord was revealing to me some of the ruined places that he longed to rebuild. part of the first week, too, was wild weather. Have any of you been to Scotland? Some of you? Did any of you have wild weather? I know it's not known for like sunny, warm beaches, but the first week was wild. Snow-capped peaks, sideways wind. I don't know how fast it was blowing, but it really did threaten to rip my tent apart. I remember hiking across the Isle of Mull in that first week and looking down at my pants, and the inside of my one pant leg, the outside of my one pant leg, completely soaking wet like I had been in a pool, and the other side completely dry because the rain was coming completely sideways. So it really was a wild place that reminded me of the ruins. But God was healing me, and I do feel like I have come back a different person in many ways than I left because of God's goodness to me. Week 2 felt very much like silent companionship. As I stepped into that week, it felt like the Lord became quieter and that I became quieter. I'd kind of run out of things to say. And that was a work of the Lord. That was a good thing for me. And so I don't know if you have a dear friend or a spouse or a parent, but someone that you feel like you can just be in a room with and no words need to be said. Do you feel like you have anyone like that in your life? That's how it felt. It was not lonely at all, but it felt like the Lord was just with me as a silent friend. Not saying much, me not saying much, but just being together. And so it reminded me of John 15. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. And I felt like I grew in a deeper in my friendship with Jesus in the second week of the trip. Some of you may know Mark Buchanan. He's a professor at Ambrose University and Seminary. He says this: maybe no one truly becomes themselves, wholly, freely, unreservedly, not needing to be someone else, until we walk long enough with Jesus that we become as he is. And I certainly don't feel like I am totally like Jesus. But boy, I hope I'm on the way and feel like I'm on the way. And I feel like I know many of you out here tonight, probably most of you, I know many of you are on the way with Jesus, and you remind me of Jesus too. So let me show you just a couple more pictures. This was in a sheep field. There are so many sheep in Scotland. It is amazing. This was in a sheep field. No one around me. And so, of course, no one's there to take my photo. I've got to take a photo of my shadow. So that's me walking. What's funny about this picture was not 5 minutes after this, in this same field, middle of nowhere, I'm walking, and 4 women began walking toward me, coming through a gate. And, you know, as I saw people on the trail, I'd, hey, how are you? Good morning, whatever. As I'm walking up to these people, I kind of put my head down, and then I hear, are you Jay Ewing? It's like, what? I was like, yes. She was like, I'm Jan. And immediately it clicked for me that Melissa's dad's best friend's wife, Jan, was walking with 3 of her friends from Vancouver Island on the West Highland Way, a 6-day journey from Glasgow up to Fort William. And she knew I was there. I didn't know she was there. And it was absolutely amazing. So I should have put the picture in, but I gave her a big hug. We took a photo together. And actually, it was amazing because at that moment, at that point in my trip, second week, I felt like, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing someone that I knew. And so that felt like God's gift to me. I put this next photo in. This is my campsite on the shores of the original Loch Lomond. Yeah, not our Loch Lomond, although ours is probably even more fantastic. But this was the shores of Loch Lomond in Scotland, after which ours is named. And I put my tent a little too close to the lake because, of course, the wind got whipping that evening and almost flooded my tent, but I made it out alive. This next photo is along the path. I don't know if you can see or not, but I'm completely soaked, but still smiling. I was enjoying that day because that night I had a hotel. And so I was getting close to the hotel at that point. The next picture, I had to put at least one picture of sheep. It wasn't lost on me on my journey that I'm a pastor. And what is a pastor? A shepherd, right? And I only saw one shepherd on my entire trip. It seemed to me there were no shepherds in Scotland, just a lot of sheep. But I saw one shepherd. And it was right in front of me. On his farm was an ancient Celtic church, a ruin of a church right on his farm. I just walked by it. And he was pulling his sheep into the sheepfold as a wild weather was coming. And this tiny little sheep was beginning to escape. And the shepherd just reaches down, grabs it, picks it up. And it was so nice. He was just caring for this sheep. And that really was how the Lord was caring for me that week very much. I stumbled upon this church. I don't know what it's called. I can't remember the name of the town. But if you zoom in and look at the sign, it's a little fuzzy. Try praying. I was like, Lord, I am trying to pray. But if I needed encouragement, there it was. I was trying to pray. So shortly after that point, this is around the middle of my trip, second week, was the low point of my trip. There were a few low points, but not many. But there was a low point. It was a really long day of walking. I had to walk through kind of an uninspiring area. It was kind of in between Glasgow and Edinburgh, kind of popping through little towns, edges of cities, through past a major prison. And then my route got stuck. So I'd been following my route. It was quite convoluted through there. And all of a sudden, an entire neighborhood was in construction. So every way I tried to go were big walls, no entrance, whatever. And so I finally made my way around there. I made it to a place called Kirk Newton. And so I stopped in the Kirk Newton pub. There was one pub in town I stopped in. It was dingy. It was dark. There were 5 men in there sitting in a circle drinking beer in the middle of the day. And their conversation, I couldn't help but listen. I was pretty intrigued by people by that point. And their conversation was just so hopeless. And it really affected me. I thought, I've got to get out of this town. And so I kept walking. I walked on many, many people's private property, but in Scotland, there is no official private property. It's all right of way. So you can camp and walk anywhere you want in Scotland, which is absurd to me, but you can. So I'd walk right past someone's front, living room, walk by and, keep going. But I was walking through a field, no one around, and then into a forest, and all of a sudden a guy shows up right behind me, shaved head, interesting clothes. And so I'm hiking and already feeling a little on edge because of my experience throughout the day. And so I think, what am I going to do? So I decide, I think I'll stop and turn around and be friendly. So I did that, turned around, and he was very kind. I just said, what are you doing? And he said, I live in a farmhouse near here, and I'm going to watch the sunset and have some beer. It's like, oh, okay. All right, I'll let you walk in front of me. And so he did. He walked in front of me and eventually he cut off, and I think that's exactly what he did. But I felt like, I don't want to camp here, so I'm going to keep going. So my day got longer and longer, and eventually I hit the Pentland Hills. And it was the boggiest place I'd been in all of Scotland to that point. And so my feet were soaking wet. Everywhere I looked, I'm looking for a campsite. There is nothing dry whatsoever. And so I walked for another hour and eventually came upon a tiny little trail. And I think the next picture is the sunrise that next morning. This is in the Pentland Hills. You can see, it doesn't look that boggy, but believe me, friends, that was boggy. And it was at that moment that I was feeling pretty low. And so Mike, I mentioned him before, he helped me to plan this trip. I had cell service, and so I reached out to him via WhatsApp. And I just said, Mike, would you please pray for me? And he actually sent me a voice message. Take a listen.
Hey Jay, I thought it'd be fun just to hear my voice. Mate, the hardest part is actually done, but most importantly, you've just stayed the course and you've done it through the weather that the Lord's allowed to give you at this time. And so you've had a lot of rain, you've had a lot of cold, you've had a fair bit of wind, but you've lent in and you've pressed on, and that is what you're doing. And so I actually want you to be encouraged, because this is a different type of thing that you're walking through and overcoming, both internally in your own heart and mind and whatever the Lord is saying to you, but also that's reflected physically through pressing through the elements, just like the ancient saints. So well done, good and faithful servant. And just know that I'm thinking of you every day, cheering you on. And listen, mate, the best is yet to come, and there's going to be a moment when you're going to see the sea. You're going to see the North Sea, and you're going to realise that you have walked the breadth of Scotland and into North England, which is amazing. And you've done it with Jesus.
So I don't know how that impacts you, but it makes me feel like I want to cry again. It was deeply encouraging to me at a low point in my journey, and that felt like the turning point. The next day I woke up, a different spirit within me. I walked through a lot of bogs that day, but it began week 3, which really started to feel like a journey of joy, is what it felt like. This first picture is Melrose Abbey, one of the great Celtic monasteries of the day. I can't remember the century, but around those years, I think 7th century, I believe. Melrose Abbey, and this is where St. Cuthbert, who I mentioned before, I know there's a lot of names, but St. Cuthbert got his start here. And after Aiden was the bishop of Holy Island, Lindisfarne, St. Cuthbert took his place and was the one who became the most famous saint in England for a period of time. So this is Melrose Abbey. Shortly after being in Melrose Abbey, I had one of the most wonderful walks through, which began St. Cuthbert's Way, a 5-day journey that more people would walk. And I found a campsite. One thing I want to say about Scotland, they don't believe in switchbacks. Everything is like straight up and straight down. And so I went straight up out of a deep valley, got up to this ridge, and this was my evening while brushing my teeth right here. This is looking back to the Waterloo Monument. You probably can't see it, but there's a very tall tower on the right-hand side, a stone tower. I forget how high it is, but it's huge. And that was my campsite, and it just reminded me of God's profound goodness to me. Like, this happens all over the world, night after night, and most of the time I don't see it, right? But it was profound. Nearing the end of my journey, I hiked up about to the 300-meter mark and camped right on the border of Scotland and England. This is my campsite here. You can tell not a lot of people around, and it was a tremendous night. And this is a view from my tent. It wasn't raining, which was a miracle. And then this next picture is, again, a selfie. Sorry, guys, but it's me hiking through the Northumberland National Park in northeastern England. This next photo is St. Cuthbert's Cave. So in the 9th century, Viking raiders came from Iceland and raided Holy Island, taking everything. And St. Cuthbert had died at that point, and so the monks who were living there took his body, hiked onto the mainland, and hid in this cave for fear of being overtaken by the Vikings. And eventually his body, as I mentioned, is now buried in Durham Cathedral. But that is what that is. And finally, that brings us to Holy Island. And so this picture is me walking across the tidal plains toward Lindisfarne. It's a 5-kilometer walk. You've got to time it right. Otherwise, the tide comes in and gets you, and you don't want to be in that. And so at this point, I had done the whole trip alone. But at this point, once I hit St. Cuthbert's Way, in the evenings or on the trail, once in a while, I would see the same people. And so I met some really, really lovely people, two of those being Caroline and David from London, and they are listening in, and I really enjoyed my time with them. They gave me a free taxi ride to Berwick-upon-Tweed, so thank you. I am deeply grateful for both of you. But together we walked across the sands and made it to Lindisfarne. And this is the ruins of Lindisfarne Priory. Beautiful, beautiful ruin. And the next photo is me and St. Aiden together in this beautiful little village. I'm told 100,000, I think it's 100,000 people go here a year to this little tiny village. And so if you're ever in that area, I'd encourage you to do the same. But all of that to say this as we come down the home stretch. Here's something I'm deeply convinced of, and these are not my words. This is an adaptation from Ruth Haley Barton. It says this: the best thing I can give someone in my ministry is my own search and longing for God. And I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but I've become more and more convinced of that over the years of ministry, that the very best thing I can do for you, for myself, for my family, for others, is to passionately pursue Jesus. And so let me just tell you a few things that I feel like the Lord gave me on this trip. One, he gave me a deeper sense of trust. There were so many things I could not control. Many, many mornings, I would wake up, I could control what I ate, I could control whether I got up and began walking, and I knew the direction. But beyond that, I had never been to Scotland before. I had no idea what the trail would hold. When would I find food? When would I find water? It was a bit of a mystery many days, and the Lord provided all the time. Let me just say one story with that. As I was coming past a farm, I'd run out of water. I'd walked past a really dirty little creek surrounded by cows. I was concerned about taking water out of that, but I really needed water. And as I hiked up, I came by the farm. I saw the farm window. I kind of, you linger and hey, and no one saw me. No one came out to help me, so I kept going. And as I walked around the edge of their barn, it was the only tap I saw in 3.5 weeks. Right there, gate open, went in, filled up my water. And it felt like, yes, this is who our God is. It feels like a small thing. It was not a small thing in that moment. I had enough water for the night. As I said, God gave me a deep healing from wounding and trauma in my life. The Lord convinced me that petitionary prayers, praying for other people, is critically important. And I feel a new recommitment to pray more deeply and longer for people and situations in my life and in our church. I was also profoundly impacted by the prayers of many of you and many of you watching online as well. Like I said, I've been a Christian my whole life. Never before in my life have I felt people's prayers like I did on this journey. And I know, Melissa, you would say the same thing. We chatted about this along the way, that you felt people's prayers holding you, giving you guys what you needed while you were here. Pilgrimage is such a metaphor for life. I can't think of a better metaphor, with the ups, downs, disappointments, excitement, all of it. It really is a great metaphor for life. One of the things Jesus showed me too was that I am a shepherd of people. But before the trip, partly due to the metanoia process we've been in as a church, partly due to other things, I was feeling less and less like a shepherd. But the Lord has reminded, no, Jay, you are a shepherd. I've made you this way. But you needed restoration, and he's done that for me. He's my provider. He has showed me the pace of life should be 3 miles an hour, 5K an hour, the speed of walking, no faster. And then the temptation for me is to control when I'm nervous or worried about something. Maybe you feel that. the Lord said, you don't need to control. There's no need to control. There's so many things I try to control that I can't control. Simply trust, simply follow, keep in step with my Spirit. So I'm profoundly grateful for this journey. It was life-changing, and there's one last learning that I think is better said through a story. So let me tell you a story, but before I do, a bit of background. Decades ago, I found a mentor in my life, and his name was Brennan Manning. And some of you will recognize that name. He's an author. He was a Franciscan priest, struggled throughout his entire life with alcoholism. But he's written some beautiful, powerful books. I've read most of what he's written. And he would never know me, but I had the privilege of meeting him twice at 2 different conferences. And he was the guy who taught me in my early 20s what it meant that God loved me profoundly and that his grace was never ending for me no matter what I ever did. And so he wrote a story. He told a story in one of his books, and it goes like this. Several years ago, Edward Farrell, a priest from Detroit, went on a 2-week summer vacation to Ireland to visit relatives. His one living uncle was about to celebrate his 80th birthday. On the great day, Ed and his uncle got up early. It was before dawn. They took a walk along the shores of Lake Killarney and stopped to watch the sunrise. They stood side by side for a full 20 minutes and then resumed walking. Ed glanced over at his uncle and saw that his face had broken into a broad smile. Ed said, "Uncle Seamus, you look very happy." "I am," he said. "How come?" And his uncle replied, "The Father of Jesus is very fond of me." And that's what the Lord showed me. More than anything else, that he is very, very fond of me. And that is life-changing. Friends, this is the greatest gift that was given to me, to know and experience God's good love. And as we conclude this evening in a few moments here, I wonder, what might the Lord be inviting you to in your friendship with him in the coming months? What might that be? And as you hear his voice, I guess my question would be, will you say yes to whatever that is? I would be more than happy to go for a coffee, to chat more about any of this, but I feel like it's probably enough for this evening. So I'm getting some texts. Let me see. We're going to have a little question period here. So, yeah, if you have a question, if I've not answered something for you, I'd encourage you to come to the mic and, ask your question. Before you do, let me just say this. There are a few books that have been really helpful for me, and there's hundreds of books on pilgrimage. One of the books that's been helpful for me, and really it's not so much about pilgrimage, but just walking with God in different ways, walking through the woods, going through Trowbridge, whatever it might be. But it's God Walk by Mark Buchanan. He, as I mentioned earlier, is a professor at Ambrose, and he's going to be with us at the end of June. He's going to be preaching and helping to lead our staff, so you'd have a chance to meet him as well. But powerful book, very easy to read. This is the book that George gave me, The Way is Made by Walking. He's a pastor and professor. He's actually from Ontario, and this book is all about his practical journey, but also his theological musings on the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Great book. And I'd be happy to lend any of these out to you. And the last one, which is a little more specific, but I stumbled upon this book as I was planning this trip, Britain's Pilgrim Places. There are so many pilgrimages from an afternoon to 40 days across the UK, but they're all over the world. So if you're ever interested, you'd be welcome to borrow that as well. But my father-in-law, I don't have a question, just wanted to text you. Thanks, Dad, for that. Rob Freeman. I've got a text here. You don't want to speak in the mic? Where is Rob? I saw him earlier. Where are you, Rob? There you are. What could a starter pilgrimage look like in Northern Ontario? Yes. Great question. Great question. I mean, you help lead these every 2 weeks, right? A pilgrimage really doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to require a plane, a bus, a train, a taxi. None of it. We can do this in our backyard. We can do this in Trowbridge. We can do this in our neighborhood. And to more specifically answer that question, Rob, I think I would point to this book, God Walk. Honestly, it addresses kind of that, walking with the Lord, praying, living your life with him while walking wherever it is. So, yes. My brother is saying, sorry for making fun of your colorblindness. Yes. I accept that. I accept that. All right. No one's serious on here. So anyway, we won't be much longer. But if you have any questions, please step forward. Andrew's coming. I got to brace myself for this.
Thank you very much, Dave, for presenting to us this evening. It's very special that you took some time to present to all of us this evening, and you can see that we're all here and supportive of you and very happy for the time that you had in doing this pilgrimage. And thank you very much for sharing this idea of just sharing your journey, because yes, I found that very helpful as well. When you were on the pilgrimage, did you get into like a daily rhythm? Obviously you're walking every day, but tell me a little bit about how you felt during that daily rhythm, how you adjusted to that, how your mind started to change, let's say, in its patterns of thinking even while you're on that journey.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you didn't hear that, or maybe online if you couldn't hear, just the question about daily rhythms while on the trail and the pilgrimage, what was that like? Did you get into rhythms, etc.? So yeah, I did. So I mentioned earlier that for the last 20 years, I've been praying the Celtic daily prayer, not every day, but regularly. And so I decided before I went, since I'm taking a Celtic journey, to pray the morning prayer. Every morning I would start out with the Celtic daily prayer, morning prayer, which I've committed to memory over these years, so I didn't require a book, but I would do that. And as a part of that, and Joe, actually, I know you're listening, we used to do this together back at Regent, but there's a portion of this where it comes to petitionary prayers. So I would pause, and I would allow the Lord to bring to my mind people, our church. I've probably never prayed so much for our church, so I guess there's that. Being away for so long, I owed it to you. But I would pray petitionary prayers. And then I would conclude and say the blessing over myself, because no one else was there to say it. And then throughout the day, really, I tried to, and this was Mike Andrea's encouragement to me, who had taken the journey a year earlier and who helped me so much, to be gracious with yourself. I mean, part of it, there were sections of the trail, particularly around Loch Lomond, that were really technical, and I found it really hard to keep kind of my thoughts, my prayer kind of going. But I think actually walking itself can be prayer, and so I tried to allow that to come out of me. But really, I tried more than anything just to go, Lord, here I am, and whatever you have for me, whatever you bring to my mind, whatever I feel like I need to process with you or say to you or confess to you, like I'm open. And so it wasn't overly prescriptive, but the Lord very much led me. Someone mentioned to me, it might have been in this one book, actually, it was this pastor, professor who's from Ontario, said there's something, and don't quote me on this, doctors, whatever, don't quote me on this, but he thinks there's something about walking, and particularly walking with trekking poles, which I'm a huge fan, by the way, now, that you're like linking both of the hemispheres of your brain by doing that movement. And by doing that, it really helps to bring out of you memories, things from your past. Like there were things and people I have not thought about for 30 years, maybe more. They were coming to my mind. And as they did, I allowed the Spirit, to kind of lead me. How might I pray for this kid from my street back when I was in grade 5, And so I tried to keep it pretty loose. And then in the evening, I would pray a particular prayer. I'd say the evening prayer over myself and drift off to sleep. One of the things was I was so tired at the end of the day. Often when I was tenting, I did stay in some hostels and hotels, but when I was tenting, often I'd get to wherever I was about 4 o'clock. I'd get into my tent, often my sleeping bag because it was cold. I'd cook outside the door, and then I'd often fall asleep. I was so tired, and I think the latest I went to bed was about 9:30. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question, Andrew? Yeah. I tried not to be too prescriptive, but give myself some kind of guide rails or handrails to help keep me moving along. So, yeah. Other questions? Oh, I've got one here. Maybe a serious one. Oh, Tony, go, and then I'll come to this one.
So I also want to thank you. This is very informative, and really appreciated hearing what you have experienced over this past time. I know you did a great deal of preparation and making sure that you knew what you were getting into. And you've just hit on a couple of them, so I know this may be slightly redundant, but what was truly unexpected? What really caught you off guard, if anything?
That's a good question. Yeah, what caught me off guard? I mean, one of the things was people's kindness, to be honest. One of the things I didn't say about those two guys, Ian and Diego, who were from Edinburgh that I met as we were trying to get to Iona. They asked me while we were on Iona, hey, where are you staying tonight? And I said, well, we'll probably go back to the same campsite. And it was pretty cold and wild. And they said, hey, we're staying at a little hall. It's got a little bedroom in it. There's extra beds. Come stay with us. And these guys don't know me. They invited me to come. I took them up on it. I stayed there. They cooked me a delicious Spanish dinner. Didn't charge me anything. Paid for heat. You had to put in coins in this thing. And do you know about this? I've never seen this. These lights, like you're getting cooked, turn on and start heating you. And the minute they click off, you start freezing again. And so, I mean, the kindness of people that I didn't know really stuck out to me. The fact that I could actually be alone that long was surprising. I actually thought I might come back with a very long stare and that would be it. I wasn't sure. To be really honest, I wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen. Probably worried you, Melissa. Kids? Yeah? Were you worried? Probably, yeah. But I felt lonely only a couple of times. That really surprised me. And it wasn't for lack of caring or anything. I think it was because the Spirit felt so close that in God's presence, what are you lonely for? Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. I think I've got one here from Vanessa watching online. Do you find yourself also singing songs of worship, either out loud or quietly? Yes, a few times. We sing one song. Oh, am I going to remember this? Rains fell, winds blew, but my tent was built on you. I sang that a lot, right? Some people have asked, did you listen to podcasts or listen to music? I didn't. I didn't. I just tried to go in silence. So, yeah. So not really. Heidi. Okay, I hope I can read this out loud because. So this is Heidi and Joe, some of our great friends, pastors in Fresno, California. Hey Jay, you said the most important thing on the trip was experiencing more deeply how fond God is of you. How has that shaped or reoriented you as you've re-entered your life at home as a shepherd at Redwood Park? Ooh. $10 question. Well, yeah. I don't know if it's reshaped me. What I hope is that it's made me more loving. In recognizing God's love, I hope it's made me more loving toward all of you, toward others in our city, toward my family, friends. That's what I would hope, that to encounter God's love in such a profound way would make me more like him. That's what I would long for. So, question. Sorry. Come on up. And you're brand new to our church.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. On Sunday, I was very inspired. I got to meet Redwood Park Church when I came for food bank.
Yeah.
That was my first time. I never heard as I came to Thunder Bay, as I came to Canada. And I was really inspired by what we were doing and the elderly giving out and all that. And I said, okay, because once you love something, you go out and research for it. So I started looking, I downloaded the apps, followed through the rebuild and all that. And on Sunday, amazingly, I came and I was so much more inspired. And my question to you, because I have kind of a project, Wilderness, the Journey, according to Deuteronomy 8:2. And while on Sunday, it was Pentecost Sunday, and the Pastor Joel preached about community, because the Pentecost, of course, is the birth of the church. And then I saw on the app about wilderness, the pilgrimage and everything. And my question to you is, thank you for this. It's an eye-opener. It's very insightful and inspirational. And then the journey for healing for you. And then the more we walk with Jesus, you get to know him more and be like him. And my question now is, how do we relate this to the young ones? Because Wilderness, the Journey, is all about them also experiencing Jesus, because they have so much passion. When I came here, I saw the youth and sharing their experiences and all that. So how do we relate it to them? Because it has to be, like you said, a personal journey.
Yeah.
And you said wilderness doesn't have to be long. It could be a few days. And Thunder Bay is a community that has so much of what you experience and all that. How can we, encourage these young ones to go through this process and then encourage themselves, love themselves more, get to know that God is fond of them too? How do we get that into them? Thank you very much.
That's a good question. And I know you work with and feed children in Nigeria and have been involved already here. Yeah. I don't know that I have the answer, but I wonder if the answer is that if we each pour into our relationship with Jesus in the most profound, open-handed way we possibly can, that he will transform us. And the more we become like Jesus, the more attractive that is to everyone around us, including the young ones. You know, I mean, can you imagine? Think of the most inspiring Christian you know. Can you imagine if more of us were like that? I feel like that would change the next generation and the next generation. They would want to be like us. So, I mean, I think that's at least one thing we can do. And, you know, you're touching on something that we deeply believe in here. We want to be a community for the youngest ones, the most vulnerable among us, and to pour into them. So, but yeah, it's something we probably need to keep talking about and thinking about, for sure. Quick question. This will be on our YouTube feed. Yeah. So after tonight, this will be available, I believe, on our website. Is that right? Yeah. Or YouTube channel or whatever. Yeah. Bekeme. Bimo. Come on. And we'll conclude pretty quickly here.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for sharing. I didn't want to come forward because I don't want you to consider me a gossip or anything, but I'm an English literature graduate, so I'm always concerned about storylines. And thank you, firstly, for reminding us that God is fond of us, reminding me that God is fond of me.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, you know the men who were talking at the inn, what were they talking about? The despondent men that...
Oh, yeah.
that made you leave? Thanks.
Yeah, so the question is, at Kirk Newton Pub, what were the guys talking about over beer? You know, I can't remember exactly. But I think as I kind of listened in, I couldn't help but listen in. There was no music, 5 guys in a pub and me. I think it was the sense of hopelessness. They just seemed really angry, judgmental. The content of their conversation seemed so unappealing to me. And you know, one of the beauties of being the church, and we're in no way perfect, any of us, but we really do enjoy rich community here. People are wonderful. We're all a work in progress, but we're becoming more like Jesus. And man, I love that. I think it was the contrast between what I experienced here and my family and beyond to just the desolation that many people experience all around us all the time. It really hit me. And I think I was soft to that. You know, I could probably walk in someplace tomorrow and not feel the same feeling, but after you're walking days and hours with nothing but your thoughts and Jesus, and it's just that much more of a contrast. So, yeah, I'm sorry I can't really answer your question, but it just felt really, really hopeless. Yeah. So I'm aware of time. Is there one last question? If not, I have just a couple things I want to say. Nothing on the chat, Jer? No. Okay. All right. So I've mentioned a couple resources. There's hundreds out there, but you'd be welcome to come and take a look or borrow some of my books. But God Walk, The Way is Made by Walking, and I'll also highlight that Pete Gregg, who helped connect me with Mike, Pete Gregg is the founder of 24/7 Prayer and Lectio 365, is actually writing a book right now on St. Aidan's Way, this journey. And I believe it was supposed to be out in May. I think now it's coming out in the fall. So I'm going to get that book when it comes out, but those are a few resources for you. But let me just say thank you to a few people. One, I want to say thank you to Pete. And Mike, honestly, without you, I would not have made it. And yeah, I'm profoundly thankful. You have changed my story, my family's story. Ian and Diego, thank you for your hospitality. I needed that second night, and you guys were there for me, so thank you. Thanks for checking in on me, even across my journey. Caroline and David in London, honestly, part of the joy I experienced was because of you guys. You probably wouldn't know that. We didn't walk with each other all that much, but it really was a joy to walk with you, and thank you for paying for the taxi to Berwick upon Tweed. And then for all of you, my church here and everyone who prayed, those of you online who I know have been praying for me and curious about the trip. Like I mentioned, I've never felt people's prayers like I did on this trip. It was profound. And then for our church and staff who covered for me while I was away, I know that's extra work. So thank you, honestly. And then for Melissa, Ada, Claire, I couldn't have done this without you. I know when I told someone, yes, I'm going away for 3.5 weeks to Scotland on a pilgrimage, they said, how's your marriage? Are you guys okay? And that thought had never crossed my mind because we have a really great marriage, and all I really experienced from you was support and encouragement from all three of you. So thank you. I couldn't have done it without you guys jumping in, helping clean, take care of the place, and supporting me. So yeah, so thank you. So let's give a hand to everyone who had a part, and you are a big part of that. So. Okay. Without further ado, let me pray a prayer of blessing over you, if I can remember it from my Celtic daily prayer. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much.